Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's The Hindu Newspaper Analysis, where we shall be taking a look at the important articles which have appeared in the Delhi edition of the Hindu Newspaper today, that is 20th of June, and we shall be taking a look at the perspectives associated with those particular topics. So here, the topics that we are going to discuss today are basically a rising India in waltz dance steps with the US. So that is a topic which is relevant for your GS paper 2 as well as for your essay paper that has appeared in page 6 of the Delhi edition. And then refugees as assets to their new countries. On the perspective of the World Refugee Day, this is an article which has been penned to talk about and to bring into picture the plight of the refugees, especially in the countries that they go to. So here we shall be analyzing why is it that we experience refugee crisis in general, what is the global compact for refugees which has been arrived at. So all those details we shall be taking a look at, relevant for your GS3 essay, and sometimes in the portion of social justice it can also be asked. So to be found in page 6 again. Then a summit with substance, a global summit for finalizing the financing of the various different conventions and international financing in general is being held in France to be co-chaired by India. So that is something which you will find in relevance for GS2 or GS3 depending upon which convention we are talking about, and that is included in page 7. And then we are going to take a brief look at the topics which are relevant for your prelims examination. Out of that, India has basically provided one of the vessels, that is the naval vessels, to Vietnam, that is INS Kirpan. Now it is deployed with missiles and then it has been handed over. So we are going to take a look into that. Then we are going to take a look into what do we understand by phonons and quantum tech, and Mesolithic era rock paintings have been discovered near the Guntur district in Andhra Pradesh. So these are the regions that we are going to focus upon. And at the end of the discussion, we are going to analyze two subjective type questions along with the perspective that how we can frame the answer for that. And the subjective questions that we are going to discuss today will be of the analysis type as well as the statement-based question, because they are also of various different types. So without further ado, let us initiate the discussion, and let us initiate the discussion with the first topic, that is a rising India in waltz dance steps with the US. Now this is an article appeared in page 6, and this is an article which has been written because the context has been provided by the Prime Minister's visit to United States. And as we are speaking, the Prime Minister has recently, or a few minutes back, has actually departed on his trip to United States. So that is why this trip to United States by the Prime Minister is going to become relevant quite significantly for the next couple of months. And it is in that backdrop that this article has been written. And this article, in a nutshell, talks about the importance of Indo-US relationship in carrying forward the developmental journey of the country. Because India is faced with various different issues and various different problems which in a way serve as a roadblock in our developmental process. So that is why Indo-US collaboration is being talked about here. Now here, this article, if you analyze it carefully, it talks about different perspectives and it can be categorized into two different sections. The first part of the article deals with the progressive journey, the developmental journey that India has already embarked upon, and the developmental parameters and the developmental results that we are getting in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the economic dividend that we are getting. All those aspects already indicate that we are on the right path. But still at the same time, there is a dichotomy because we still have lots of people in inefficient portions of the economy, and also a lot of structural reforms are required in the economy. So that is what it talks about. So first of all, the developmental journey of the country. Now, it will be quite naive to think about the developmental journey of the country directly from 1947 itself, because the country has been in existence for thousands of years. And in fact, this article rightly points out that right up till the 1700s, Indian economy controlled, or rather contributed close to around 35% of the global economy or the global GDP. So that was the contribution of the Indian economy. And then after independence, it reduced quite significantly, and furthermore, by the time that we needed some economic reforms, Indian economy's contribution to the world was a meager 1%. Slowly and steadily, as the overall economic growth has been happening for the past 2 decades now, Indian economy is again rising up, and we have the size of close to around $3.7 trillion as of the GDP when we count about it. But then also you have to understand that our share in the global economy has started rising up to close to around 4 to 5%. And this is significantly aided by the various economic reforms, but also by the perspective of the population that we have. So let us analyze the things which are working for us, which are helping us march down the path of progression. So first of all, the demographic dividend. Now, what do we understand by demographic dividend? Basically, India is a country whereby you have more than 65% of the population. 65% of population is below the age of 45 or 35 years. Now, that is a benefit, because that tells us that in the next decade and a half, that is up till around 2038, we will have lot number of younger people entering into the workforce. And when the younger generation and the younger population and more population enters the workforce, always it has been observed that the economic growth of the country follows that. So that is why this is one of the opportune moments in India's entire journey where we can actually reap dividends due to our populational aspect, and that is what is referred to as demographic dividend, the benefit that is accrued to you because of the qualitative features of the population. Having said that, if let's say all the younger population who are going to seek for jobs in the coming days, if they don't get required amount of jobs, then you will have greater number of unemployed population in the country, and that is never good for the country. That leads to increased social strife, civil discordance, and also a kind of a lack of harmony in the society. Lot of various different cultural as well as religious discriminations, and also violence is something which tends to prevail in any society where unemployment is very, very high. So this demographic dividend, if it is not utilized, can quickly turn into a disaster as well. But for that, we need to provide jobs. And this article also points out that just by the year 2030, the expectation is that by the year 2030, we are going to witness close to around, roughly around 1 billion working population. And that is going to be huge, because this can combine the entire population of the G8 nations. As of now, we will have more number of people working in the economic workforce. So that is the benefit that India can have. And also the population, because the population is youthful, the population is young, that has got other implications. For example, adoption of technology. Adoption of technology, the pace at which it is happening in India is almost unprecedented anywhere else across the world. Digitization is something happening across the world, but the speed at which we Indians are adopting that digitization, that is unprecedented. Overall, if you just take a look at the amount of mobile data consumed, the internet data which is consumed per capita of the population, it was very, very low around 10 years back. And the cost of the data was also amongst the highest in the world. And India did not even figure out in the top 100 of the list 10 years back when it came to mobile data consumption or per capita internet consumption. But today, if you compare that same data, India is amongst the leading nations of the world when it comes to per capita data utilization. Now that in itself brings about a humongous scope of possibilities in front of any individual. For example, if you have the access to internet, you can have access to education, you can have access to healthcare, You can have access to finances, and financial inclusion can actually reach your doorsteps in that case. You can have access to all the various different government services. And more or less, you will also be able to facilitate the economic opportunities that you have with the help of the internet access. And that has been made possible. Why? Obviously, there has been an enabling factor from the side of the government, but also because of the properties of the population. Then, the infrastructure story of India has been nothing short of remarkable. Because in the past 10 years or so, 10 to 15 years, the amount of investment that the infrastructure has seen has been increasing exponentially so. As of now, the present day scenario actually tells us that amongst the entire of the major global economies, if you compare, India is one such economy and one such country which is investing very heavily in infrastructure. Obviously, infrastructure is something which has got a larger gestation period. Infrastructure will not give you results immediately. But when you connect, let's say, a remote village near the region of Arunachal Pradesh, let's suppose. Now that remote village, if you connect it by roadways to a nearby district, what will it bring about? It will bring about the connectivity to the people, in the sense it will empower people. It will empower people to explore all the various opportunities that they have, to realize the economic potential that they have. Goods and services can reach the absolute hinterland. There will be greater demand which will be generated. And automatically, all of this augurs well for economic growth. So, infrastructure has got a delayed result always associated with it. But nonetheless, the rate at which the highways, the expressways, the number of airports that are being constructed, the newer projects which are being constructed, the rate at which it is happening in India, as of now, it is not happening anywhere else in the world. And that is a kind of a green growth associated with it in terms of infrastructure as well. Because you have in the taxation structure itself, you have the aspect of infrastructure cess, also carbon tax. All of these factors, they include or they bring about the environmental aspect to the growth story. When it comes to provision of subsidies, understand, across the globe now there is a consensus that when you provide subsidies to fossil fuel, like earlier we used to have greater amount of subsidies for petroleum, diesel, etc. So when you provide subsidies to the fossil fuel, in a way, you are subsidizing environmental degradation. Because now when the petroleum and diesel, these fossil fuels are very, very cheap, what happens? People will consume it more. And as an importing nation that India is, because India doesn't have enough production of oil and other fossil fuels on its own. India is dependent on imports. So as an importing nation, India not only spends a lot more foreign exchange reserves, but at the same time, India ends up polluting the environment even more. So just by reduction of the subsidies to fuel, by reduction of subsidies, the saving in the past 6 to 7 years, the saving is projected to be in the tune of close to around 43,000 crores. Roughly, just by reduction of subsidies in the fuel. Now, in a way, that will always augur the government's coffers when it comes to, or the government's money when it comes to investing more on infrastructure, but at the same time, it is a kind of a justifiable and a more responsible environment practice as well. Now, when this figure is extrapolated in the coming years, you can expect a saving close to around $7 to $10 billion in the next decade, just because of this green growth, the processes that we are following. Then you also have Pragati scheme that the government, the central government has basically brought about. Now, what is Pragati? So, Pragati is proactive governance and timely implementation. Now, this particular scheme earlier was launched way back in 2015. Now, last year in the month of November 2022, now you have Pragati 2.0, which has been launched in November 2022. Now, what is this Pragati scheme? Pragati scheme is basically a kind of a stock-taking exercise carried out by the Prime Minister's office. The PMO is in charge of stock-taking exercise with regards to the infrastructural bottlenecks that are prevalent across the various different projects being implemented in the country. Now, as per the estimates of the World Bank and the various different consultancy firms way back in 2012, that gave an idea that the amount of infrastructure projects being stuck in various different phases of implementation across the country, that amounted to close to around 17.5 lakh crores. That much worth of infrastructure projects were stuck. Now this Pragati, what it has done is, it has basically, in a way, provided the free flow to these projects. In a way, it has removed the bottlenecks in the implementation of these projects in various different areas. So that has brought about a speedy infrastructure deployment both by the state as well as the central region. Then the Gati Shakti, which has been also released and launched recently. Now this is a kind of a geographical indication system, and it basically gives you an idea about where you have, or in a way parallel stacking of maps, so that you get an idea where you have the road network, where is it that you need to lay the pipelines, where you have the electrical cables, so that that periodic digging up of the ground that you see in whichever part of the country you are from, you would be observing this as a phenomena. You would observe that first of all a road is built, then after a few days that road is dug out. Why? They have to lay electrical cables from there. Then again the road is built. Then after 10 days, again some of that is dug out. Why? Because now water supply pipeline has to go. So this significantly increases the amount of investment required and the cost incurred. And infrastructural development, that doesn't happen in a kind of a dovetailed strategical approach, that everything is shaped around providing services to the citizens. That is not how infrastructure development is happening. And that is where the Gati Shakti program by the government is improving that. Then you have another system and other such systems implemented across the spectrum. For example, you have the Parivahan system for the RTOs. Right, the regional transportation offices. So be it, let's say, getting your driver license to getting the permits, everything has been made very transparent. And as a consequence of that, every year there is a loss of, or basically lack of any leakages which happen in government revenue. A lot of government revenue is now being tapped significantly. Now all these indicate what? Whenever you have lesser leakage in terms of implementation of any governance scheme or governance methodology, that always brings about greater yield of growth. Greater efficiency in terms of growth is being observed because of this. And India is a country which is not inward looking. We have people who go out and explore the world and who live in various different parts of the world. Indian diaspora is one of the strongest across the world. In fact, across the United States, Indian diaspora is amongst the second richest subgroup if you talk about the ethnicity of the population in that region. Now that Indian diaspora ends up sending close to around, and India receives close to around 100 billion US dollars as remittances every year. And that is the largest across the world. Across the world, and India has actually surpassed China for the first time in this. Across the world, no other country as of now is receiving this much amount of remittances. So this is also something which is helping the economy. But at the same time, the public financial management system has brought about, the public financial management system is what? Providing a kind of a platform for development of financial services, for direct account transfer, direct benefit transfer as it is referred to. So it brings about greater transparency. It has brought about transparency, and eventually what that has done is it has brought about financial inclusion. Now, all these have basically been the bedrock behind India's developmental journey. But again, lot more needs to be done. And here, what needs to be done has also been pointed out in the article. A thorough digitalization of the process so that further greater efficiency is received, a lesser amount of leakage happens. And also provision of jobs. Why? To prevent the demographic dividend to turn into a demographic disaster. From turning into. Now for that, you need to provide meaningful jobs. You need to provide, or the ability for the people should be such that if they don't find jobs, they should be able to generate jobs. They should be able to carry out some work on their own. And this is where Indo-US collaboration is going to help significantly, because both India as well as United States, they are now a hotbed of the startup culture also. You have large number of startups coming up in both these areas of very diverse areas, from healthcare to manufacturing to AI. You have various different types of startups coming up. And that is where job opportunities lie in large scope. And Indo-US collaboration will help achieve that. Then, till now, the trade deficit that we are experiencing is extraordinarily high. As per the latest estimates, we are experiencing a trade deficit close to around $290 billion. That is roughly around 9% of GDP, which is almost twice the amount that we experienced or the deficit that we had prior to the pandemic. So that this deficit needs to be brought under control. And how will you bring that under control? Is the correct option by reducing the imports directly? No, that is never a healthy choice. So always, trade deficit can be cured by increasing the exports. So how do you increase the exports? There can only be certain methodologies to increase the export. First, diversify your market, explore newer markets. And secondly, in the existing markets that you are present in, ensure greater penetration in the markets and greater diversification of the goods. So for example, when it comes to our trade relationship with the United States, it is largely centered around the service and very little around the manufacturing sector when it comes to exports from India. So that is where electronic items, and also as India is looking forward into entering into the semiconductor race, that is where a lot of scope lies there. So that is where Indo-US relationship will come to the rescue. And we need sectoral reforms, agricultural reforms, manufacturing, labor laws reforms. Because as of now, what do we have? We have more than 50% of the population involved in the agricultural sector, producing only around roughly 18% to 17% to the economy. So think about it, more than 50% is contributing only 18% to the economy. Obviously, the inefficiencies would be very high. And the share of manufacturing is very low, around 15 to 16%. So we need a reform, and significant reform across the sectors. Now, when you carry out these reforms, let's say in agricultural or manufacturing sector, that will increase the productivity and open up newer markets in United States, Americas, and other parts of the world. Then, critical technology. Now, we need critical technology. For what? Both for defense as well as for civilian purposes. For example, the technology for manufacturing of electric vehicles at a cheaper price. Now, that is a particular technology which can help us significantly combat the issue of fossil fuel pollution that we are facing due to transportation sector. Now, That technology, if it is made available with greater collaboration between Indo-US markets, then it will always benefit not only the global environment, but also the Indian economic progress. And second is the defense tech. Now, India has been reliant on the Russian tech for decades now. And what we have gotten as a result of that is a series of products which are not very reliable, so to say. But yes, Russia has been our reliable friend, but then the products that we get, the maintenance cost involved, the service cost involved, the service time taken, that is significantly disadvantageous for the armed forces. So India right now is looking forward and looking towards United States to get an access to the critical technology as well. And already we are hearing news stories about a jet engine deal being finalized, about the incoming of UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, those deals being finalized. So both for defense and non-defense purposes, critical technology will help, and Indo-US relationship will carry it forward. So that is all that you were required to know about this article. So in this article, we talked about India's developmental journey, what is it that is helping it, and also where is it that Indo-US relationship can be brought forward and can be brought to a head. Okay? Now, after this, we come to the second article. And this second article is basically refugees as assets to their new countries. And this has been written by the Chief of Mission, UNHCR, India and the Maldives. And this is to commemorate the World Refugee Day, which is celebrated on 20th of June. So 20th of June is when we celebrate World Refugee Day. Now here, when we talk about refugee, who is a refugee? So basically these are individuals who seek refuge or shelter somewhere else because something is not going particularly well in the region that they belong from. So they have been forced to migrate to some other area to seek refuge, to seek protection, to seek shelter. Now, over a period of time, we have seen various different types of refugees or refugees who have become refugees because of various different issues. So, what are the causes which lead to refugee crisis across the world? Let us first of all understand that. So, when we talk about causes for refugee crisis, Now, what can be the causes? First is social persecution. Now, what is this? So basically, in any society, as long as people live in harmony and there is humanity which prevails, there will be overall a peaceful scenario which will be present, which will be experienced. But sometimes a discord, a kind of understanding about the different sections of the population breeds a kind of persecution and social disharmony, almost to the verge of civil war, where a particular section of the society, they are persecuted, there is violence against them, atrocities committed against them just because of their ethnicity, their origin. Now, can you think about the example where we experienced this social persecution and refugee crisis because of that? So, in our immediate vicinity, we experienced this, and we have experienced this, for example, in the Rohingya case. Very good. Rohingyas in Myanmar. Now there, you had the local population, the ethnic-based clashes happened, and ethnicity-based clashes rather happened, and due to which lakhs of Rohingyas, they were driven out of their homes. Then after that, you have the aspect of war. War also actually leads to a lot of and a very drastic refugee crisis, whereby you have seen the examples in various different parts, be it Iraq, Syria, even Afghanistan, all these areas, you had a lot of people who escaped that region or who actually migrated out from that region because of the ongoing war. So Syria can be taken as an example. Present day example, you can take that case of Ukraine. Now, since the war broke out last year, a lot of Ukrainians have actually migrated into the neighboring states in Europe in order to seek protection, in order to seek shelter. Now, then after that, the other aspect which can be a cause for refugee crisis is climate change. Now, this is a factor which is not oftentimes understood. That how come climate change can bring about a migration or a refugee crisis. So nowadays, this is becoming a major cause of concern. And as per the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants, there also, climate change was accepted as the major factor and one of the most important factors to be looked at in the coming decades, because this will instigate a lot of migration patterns. For example, why to go very far away? Take the case of the neighboring country of Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh also shares a significant fertile portion of the Sundarban Delta, where historically for centuries altogether, people have been carrying out paddy cultivation. But because of climate change, not only are the sea levels rising ever so slightly, but also you have greater occurrences of disturbances such as cyclones, bringing about flooding in the coastal areas. And once these farmlands, they are inundated by seawater, they are unfit to be used for any crop at all. So what do the people do? They are forced to migrate. Similarly, we talk about the war-torn migration or the war-caused migration in Syria. But before the entire civil war about ISIS started, Syria had been suffering from consecutive droughts initiated due to climate change. You also have island nations which are experiencing the threat of getting submerged due to rising water level. So that climate change is inducing a lot of migrant and refugee crisis. Then, other than that, human rights violation. So when the human rights, they are violated at a rampant pace and there is a sort of anarchist situation which is created. So there also you will observe a lot of people moving out from that area. And here example can be taken of Afghanistan. Afghanistan under the rule of Taliban. Now, ever since the Taliban have taken over again, now the recent UN report indicated that there is a kind of a genocide, sort of to say, where the female population that is not allowed to participate. So a gender genocide is what the UN has termed this process to be, where based upon gender, the discrimination is so huge that people, they are forced to migrate into the neighboring regions of Iran and Pakistan. So that is a major cause of concern. And then you also have economic hardships. That also instigates a refugee crisis. And here the example can be taken of the regions such as, you can take the example of Venezuela, for example. Now Venezuela, one of the rising stars and the good performing economies in the entire Latin American region, that region had been experiencing incredible rate of inflation and a lot of people migrated out of Venezuela, and similar was the case with Zimbabwe also. And many of the African nations are experiencing refugee crisis because of this. And then you have, when we talk about Africa, another major factor which initiates or instigates this refugee crisis is hunger. Sub-Saharan Africa. Okay. Now, these are your major causes which leads to a refugee crisis. But once Let's suppose people have entered into a new area, or before that, when people have decided to leave their home and seek shelter somewhere else. The problems that they face start from this stage itself. First of all, where do they go? Because all the various countries, they impose blockade. They don't allow the refugees to come into their region. Now, suppose somehow, illegally, they end up entering into any of those countries. Then what? Then the next set of problems begin. For example, they will not have documentation. So, they will have to perform almost each and every task in an illegal manner. And they will not be provided services, proper services that they are required. They will be dependent upon whatever food is supplied out of charity. That is all that they will be required to consume. And this is what this article points out. This article points out that, look, refugees, we treat refugees as if they are a set of some wildlings coming over. But these refugees, they are humans with equal opportunities and equal capabilities. All they require is the availability of that platform where they can realize their potential. And there have been various instances of refugees coming over from Syria and being allowed to participate in the Olympic Games. They have been able to win medals as well. So they have a lot of potential. It is just that the countries that they get into, they are not ready to accept them, first of all. And even if they are accepted, there is a kind of a social discontent which prevails. Then after that, lack of provision of services. Then after that, no economic participation. And think about it, that how ironical this is, because they have migrated in order to have some economic participation, in order to earn something, to feed themselves, to feed their family. But once they have migrated to a new area, they are deprived of any of those means. So these are the issues that they face. And what is required to be done? We need to provide adequate healthcare facilities, education facilities, and also proper shelter and protection, security to the refugees, so that they will also be able to realize the potential that they carry on. Now, this is something which was also discussed when Global Compact on Refugees was actually finalized in 2018 at the UN General Assembly. Now, this Compact on Refugees, basically, it talks about preparation of a kind of a framework so that the refugees, they don't face much of a problem when they go in any place. Now, what are the problems that the refugees face is something that we have discussed. Lack of social acceptance is a major one. When we talk about the migrants or the refugees coming in an area, they are not readily accepted by the society that they are coming in. So that is a major issue. And healthcare, education, the other associated factors. So that compact for refugees prepares a framework so that the host nation doesn't get overburdened by the refugee problem. So ease the pressure on the host countries, enhance refugee self-reliance. In a way, the modern day connotation that we talk about, Atmanirbharta. So provide a kind of a self-sufficiency, self-reliance, whereby they are not dependent on everything for the government money, because eventually that will dry out. The government cannot keep on affording to give you money year after year just because you migrated maybe 30 years back. So the refugees need to be self-reliant. How will that happen? This happens only with the provision of skill development. Provision of skill development or upgradation. Expand access to third country solutions and support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity, provided that the social conditions that they were escaping from, that has returned to normalcy. So these are the factors one needs to keep in mind in order to cater to the refugee crisis that the world is facing. And that is what this article talks about. This article gives you an idea that India as a country has been a host to refugees for many, many years almost. India is also a country which is, as a civilization, we have been referred to as what? Melting pot of civilizations. Various civilizations have come in, intermingled, and co-lived here. So that is the perspective and the aim that we should carry forward in the future. Non-discriminatory approach towards refugees. Refugees of any kind, any type, we should always reach out to them, because eventually it is the humanity which trumps us all. So that is what you need to understand. Okay? Now, then we come to the next article, right? And what if they are danger to sovereign of that country? See, in the case of refugees, yes, there will always be an associated security threat which has been felt. But that would require the host country to upgrade its security status. Isn't that much more desirable that the host country improves their security apparatus so that they don't become a threat? Or even if there is a threat, it is nullified at the very small level or initial stage itself. The solution cannot be that you don't allow anyone to come in. Okay? And why some countries are restrict refugees and countries like India allow them to enter? See, that is because of the fact when we talk about the economic hardships that the country faces, that is always a major problem or a major factor in their minds. So when the refugees come in lakhs or millions, basically the provision of spaces for them to live in, the provision of shelter, infrastructure, and all of that takes a significant economic toll. And also the countries are not very sure how the society will react, let's say in 2 to 3 years, whether that will bring about a divide in the society or not. At least these are the reasons why almost all the European nations, at the outset of the Syrian refugee crisis, they turned their backs to the refugees because of these major concerns. Okay? Now, after this, a summit with substance. Now, this is about a new summit, a new global summit which is being held in France, which will be held in France on 22nd of June, and that is the summit for a new global financing pact. Now, this is a summit which is being held in France, and India is co-chairing the steering committee. India is the co-chair of steering committee. Now, before we talk about this particular summit, a brief background to all of you, that why this summit is being conducted. All of a sudden, we have heard about various different summits. We have never heard about this. So what is the backdrop of it? So for the backdrop of it, first of all, we have to go back a couple of years. And at that point of time, from Barbados, there was an initiative which was launched. And that initiative by the head of government of Barbados, that was the Bridgetown Initiative. Bridgetown being the capital of Barbados. This was launched by the head of government of Barbados, that is Miss Mia Mottley, who was the head of government. Now, she has launched this Bridgetown Initiative. This is for what? This is for restructuring the global governance and easy provision of the finances when it comes to global governance. Okay, so restructuring of global financial governance. Now, very briefly, let me tell you that this was done because many of the underdeveloped and developing nations, they have basically been observing and experiencing this for the past decade and more now, that the funds that they were being promised, or the funds that they have been promised for developmental requirements, or for adapting to climate change, or for taking care of the biodiversity, those funds are simply empty promises and that are not being provided to them. And also, it was found out that when you have any particular country, let's suppose Sri Lanka, let's take the case of Pakistan. Now, when they are suffering from a natural disaster, which is impacting their economy, the international lenders, they are not coming to the rescue. Ideally, in such situation, the loans that these countries get, they get that loan for around 14 to 15%, which is very, very high. Any developed nation, meanwhile, they can access loan at around 1 to 4%. So imagine a developed nation is getting a loan at 1 to 4%, a developing nation which requires the money and which has lost a significant amount, maybe due to the pandemic, due to natural disaster or anything, that is receiving loan at an exorbitant rate of 14 to 15%, which is making borrowing almost impossible. And that is leading to many different countries defaulting on their loan payments. Now, this basically calls for a restructuring of the global financing mechanism. And that is why Ms. Mia Mottley, basically she launched the Bridgetown Initiative. That was the pretext. Now, last year, that is November 2022, that was significant because in that duration between November and the first week of December, we had the G20 summit, we had the COP20 Conference of Parties number 27, which was held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt for the Convention to Combat Climate Change. And then you also had the Kunming-Montreal Agreement on the Convention on Biological Diversity. So various different meetings and conference of parties, they were held in that brief duration of November to December. And across the various different platforms, one factor stood out, and that is all the countries, they demanded transparent financing. They demanded the formation of maybe a new global structure, a new financing body which can provide financing to the developing and the underdeveloped regions as well. Because the various estimates and the studies have indicated that that financing is not at all available. For example, as per the estimates, the requirement of finances for dealing with the UNFCCC standards, that is to combat climate change, for Convention on Biological Diversity, in order to meet the Sustainable Development Goals also, the total amount of estimated financing required every year is close to around 4 trillion US dollars. That is the amount of funding which is required, right? Now, as of now, the funding which is available is close to around $200 billion. So you can imagine the gap which is present. And the underdeveloped and the global south, as it is referred to, the developing and the underdeveloped nations, they are suffering from it. So that is why after November last year, Emmanuel Macron actually declared that we will have a summit in France in 2023 in the month of June in order to talk about what should be the methodologies to bring about changes in the global financing mechanism. That is why this summit is being held. Now, this summit basically identifies two problems. First problem that I have indicated to you, that developing nations, they have their own requirement for the finances and those finances are not being met. And secondly, even in order to meet the sustainable development goals for the climate change perspectives, etc., that also financing is not available. So what should be the way forward? So the way forward as postulated is provided by three components. First, have a pact. Then, build upon a platform for funding. and then provide the pathway. Now, what is this pact, platform, and pathway? So when we talk about the funding mechanism, we need to have a pact, international pact, domestic pact. So this needs to happen both at the domestic level as well as at the international level. So at the domestic level, we need to have a pact whereby you have better financing and better fiscal discipline at the domestic level. Because many of the developing nations, it has been found out that they have so many various different leakages within the system. Proper tax collection and accrual is not done, that this brings about a lot of inefficiencies. So even if the funding, let's say, is provided, that funding hardly reaches the beneficiaries. And whenever you have the internal and the domestic economy not in perfect shape, private participation in general is also very low. Due to this very difficult kind of domestic economic scenario which is prevalent in global south, you will observe that of the total money given to combat climate change and for conservation of biological diversity, etc., less than 50% of that actually reaches the global south. Majority of that is consumed amongst the developed nations themselves. So that is why domestic fiscal discipline or fiscal prudence needs to be achieved. Then after that, you need to have an international pact also for where the funding will come from. And this is for the source of funding. Where do you get the source of funding? And this can be levied on, let's say, trade of fossil fuels, for example. And here, the article also points out that if suppose we charge only $1 every gallon of oil that is traded across the world, overall, we can end up generating $30 billion as a revenue or as a fund directly from that itself. So you need to have the source of funding to be diversified across the globe. You need to have various funding mechanisms in place. Then, the platform. So when we talk about platform, so the platform for funding, to provide funding. So various different smaller countries, when they go there to seek the funds, first of all, funds are not granted. Unless and until you have the backing of, let's say, a China, let's say a United States, nowadays not even China, but let's say a United States, a France, a United Kingdom, these sorts of countries, when they provide you backing, maybe you will be given funds. But when you are provided funds, the asking rate is so high and the conditions which are set up are so very harsh that majority of the countries, they don't prefer the route. So that is why, in order to ensure that greater funding is provided, we need to reduce the cost of funding. Cost of funding. How? For example, any risk mitigation mechanism for global clean energy, risk mitigation schemes, etc., and mechanisms which are in existence, what they do is they will pool in all the risk together so that the overall price of lending, that comes down, because all the risk is what is associated with the cost of funding. If when you are providing funding, the risk is very high, you will charge a greater interest. If the risk is lesser, you will charge a lesser interest. So all that risk, when it is pooled into one particular aspect and then funding is provided in groups, the overall cost will reduce and the global south will receive the required funding. And then we need to have a pathway, that is deliverables, targeted deadlines, that this is when it has to be achieved. If the funding has been promised under the Convention to Biological Diversity, that funding has to be given by the various international partners who have committed to it. Otherwise, there will be a sort of penalty of sorts. So that pathway of deliverables, tangible outcomes, and deliverables, that is required to be achieved. So that is basically, these are the three basic components which have been suggested to bring about a better funding mechanism and better governance of funding mechanism across the globe. Because if this funding is not provided today, the cost of taking care of climate change 10 years from now is going to be much higher. The cost of doing the same things 20 years from now is going to be even more higher. So that is why that needs to be brought under control. And what this will also do is it will increase the reliance and the reliability and actually the relevance of the international platforms, because international summits, conventions and platforms, people are losing trust in them because they promise big, they don't deliver. So that will be good for the international committee of members of the countries as well. Now, after that, we come to few of the articles very quickly relevant for your prelims perspective. So here in the Guntur region of Andhra Pradesh, you have the Urvakalu village. So in the Urvakalu village in Guntur district in Andhra Pradesh, you have the Mesolithic era rock painting which has been found. Now here what is relevant for you to understand is what this rock painting is made up of. So here it is made up of kyanite, what is also referred to as the China clay, right? And also red ochre. So red ochre and kyanite, they are basically predominant in this Mesolithic era painting, which is suspected to be close to around 4,000 to 5,000 years old. And interestingly, here ploughing activity is depicted. Ploughing is depicted. So this is one of the earliest rock paintings which have been found where a plough is seen being used in that particular painting. So it also indicates a kind of a semi-settled life which people in this area would already be leading. And this is a kind of a rock painting found in natural cave shelters to be found in the region. So here made up of kyanite, or rather not kyanite, kaolin rather. So kaolin and ochre. Kaolin is something that you find almost in significant quantity in the regions of the coastal states, in the regions such as Gujarat, Rajasthan, you will find a lot of kaolin to be present naturally there. Now, then the other topic relevant for your prelims is basically the phonons. Now, this article talks about quantum computing. Now, when we talk about quantum computing, it is the behavior of the smaller particles that we are concerned about. And very briefly, let me talk about it in a nutshell. When we talk about, let's say, a particular substance like this pen, we expect the behavior of this pen of a particular shape. For example, if I drop this pen, it will fall. If I throw this pen, it will move in a direction. But I cannot expect this pen to have a wavy nature of flow when I am throwing it from point A to point B. But when we talk about very small particles such as electrons, now they will have these dual properties. They will behave like a wave as well. So that is exploited in terms of quantum technology, and that is the definite behavioral pattern that these subatomic particles have that is associated with quantum tech in general. Now, electrons, for example, ideal example where, let's say, the spin of the electrons, that spin of the electrons can be utilized to fill and feed information. And that can be utilized for building very complex supercomputers that we have not yet imagined as of now. Right? Because the supercomputers that we have today are built up of what? Semiconductors. Semiconductors behave in a certain manner. They have a limitation owing to their behavior. But when we talk about quantum technology can be utilized to build the next generation of supercomputers, which will have a much greater and exponentially larger processing speed, and it can think of the problems and the solutions that we cannot even imagine now. So that is a technology of the future. Now here, when we talk about various different instruments or various different particles, for example, light propagates light propagates through movement of photons. Right? Now, sound propagates through movement of what is referred to as phonons. The particles which develop and generate a vibrational energy. Now, this particular article talks about the possibility that these phonons, they can also have that quantum behavior. And that has been found out by the various different researchers of the beam splitting technology which is available. Now, that means just by voice, you can activate a supercomputer, or you can basically provide a processing facility by the process of your voice. And that brings about significant amount of possibilities in terms of communication network, in terms of supercomputing, security services, and also in other technologies like blockchain AI as well. So that is the aspect whereby for prelims you need to understand what phonons are, and also you need to be able to understand that this opens up the possibility for quantum tech in supercomputing, which will have its relevance in supercomputers, communication technology, security apparatus, and other associated fields. Then the last article, India gifts INS Kirpan to Vietnam. Now, INS Kirpan basically is what? It is a missile corvette. Okay, that is INS Kirpan. Now here what you need to understand for the prelims perspective is that this is not the first vessel that India has provided. India has also provided high-speed petrol boats. High-speed petrol boats that have also been provided. And also we have a logistics agreement, logistics sharing agreement with Vietnam, which further increases our armed forces strategic reach all the way into the region of South China Sea. And this needs to be taken a broader perspective and looked at from a broader angle. When you think about India supplying BrahMos missiles to Philippines, India supplying petrol boats and missile corvettes to Vietnam. So India is developing very deep defense ties with the region around South China Sea. And that will be particularly instrumental in the coming days as China is going to flex its muscles. But nonetheless, this is something that you need to understand only for prelims. It is a Kukri class. Kukri class missile corvette. Okay. So that is all for today's analysis. Now we shall be taking up a couple of questions. So here, India's developmental journey has been high-paced but found lacking at the same time. So this is a statement-based question. In the context of the above statement, discuss the role played by the strong Indo-US relationship in India's growth story. Now this is a 250-worded answer that is required to be written. So in the intro, write about that the brief background that how India has basically embarked upon the developmental journey, which was particularly hampered during the British era, and slowly and steadily the per capita income as well as the national income that is increasing. Now, here, if you observe the statement carefully, it talks about the two perspectives. Development has been high-paced but found lacking. So here you have to talk about the benefits of the development or the good points where the development has shown immense promise, greater internet consumption, demographic dividend, high rate of infrastructure building. All these factors you bring to the table, at the same time fiscal discipline, etc. And then the lacunae, right? So lacunae or the still the things that we need to work ahead. So when you are bringing into picture these lacunae or where we need to improve simultaneously, you can talk about how Indo-US relationship is going to benefit that. Eventually, at the time of writing conclusion, you can talk about that the partnership between the world's oldest and the world's largest democracy is not only going to benefit 1.5+ billion or 1.5 billion population plus that lives in these areas, but also in the long run, it will benefit the entirety of the world. So that is how you can write the conclusion in a positive perspective. Then, collaborations like the Summit for New Global Financing Pact is paramount in maintaining the relevance of the global conventions and organizations. Analyze. It is not elaborate or elucidate, it is analyze. So here you have to bring the two perspectives of the statement, whether the statement is correct or incorrect. So first of all, yes, these collaborations will help in increasing the reliance on these global institutions and global mechanisms. It will keep them relevant. It will ensure development and trust of the global south. All these factors you talk about, but at the same time, also ensure that you bring the other side of the picture. That is, just providing the funding mechanism will not keep the global institutions relevant. There is a general erosion of trust because of various factors. For example, developed nations, they are not taking care of their own set of promises. All the developed nations, they had promised something as per the Paris Agreement. They have not followed suit. So all those factors that you have to talk about, and eventually you have to talk about that multilateralism and dialogue. That is the only way out if we need to keep these institutions and conventions relevant and be able to serve the future population and future generation as well. So that is how you can conclude the answer. I suggest please try to write an answer, get it evaluated. It will help you in the long run. And at the end of it, I would suggest to you to go to the Telegram channel and take the multiple choice questions quiz that we have for you, and that will give you an overall assessment of the portion which has been understood. So that will be all for the discussion for today. If you have liked the video, if you have liked the content, please don't forget to click on the like, share and subscribe button. Thank you and goodbye.